All right, hello and welcome to another stream. Tonight, with all of the meets and the takeover activity that's been going on in Raleigh and surrounding areas, I just wanted to talk about the media coverage and some of how they have portrayed the car scene here locally, even though a lot of this can be applied nationally, how they talk about modified vehicles. Mostly going to be picking on WRAL. But again, anywhere you live, you can probably apply this to your local media or national media. And I wanted to show a couple of stories that have happened here lately in Raleigh, just as examples. So I'm going to go ahead and dive right into it. The first one is this story. This was published in March of 2013. Wake County top spot for street racing poses risk for local drivers. And I'm just going to play the video here, pausing it incrementally.
A small part of the population is engaging in street racing, yet as we just saw, it can impact anyone. You could suddenly be caught up in the consequences. Tonight, WRAL Investigates is analyzing where the racing is happening most often.
On the roads, our lives depend on the drivers around us. A frightening thought as street racing.
I wanted to point this clip out because I thought this was really interesting. This is not a normal activity in street racing. If this person was intending to race, you might do a brief burnout to warm up your tires, but not to the point to where your rotors are glowing and there's just smoke everywhere. Like a lot of times at a drag strip, they might do a little showy burnout just because they have a really powerful car, but again, it's heating up the tires and that's about it. This is not a street race. This is a takeover. The main difference is you're really just doing stunts, showing off, being stupid. The point's not to be faster, but let me continue on.
Continues in the Triangle area.
They don't realize how serious they are until they've been pulled over.
Bill Powers is an attorney in Charlotte who has represented people charged for street racing. In North Carolina, a driver could either be charged with willful speed competition, which is spontaneous racing, or prearranged speed competition, which is more serious.
I do want to point out there, willful would be like you pull up at the stoplight, he pulls up at the stoplight, one or both of you rev your engines and you just take off. Prearranged would be the purpose of the meet was to organize a street race. So yeah, like the main street race scene in The Fast and the Furious is a good example. They went to a meet, they left the meet, and that meet was for the races.
WRAL Investigates found the number of charges for street racing was higher in the height of the pandemic. From 2020 to 2021, there were 557 charges statewide. The following year, that went down to 387, but that's when Wake...
I just want to point out, so you're saying when everyone was unemployed and bored, street racing went up like pretty much every other crime?
County rose to the top of the list with more charges than anywhere else.
Particularly Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department.
I want to go back to that too. Well, I'm gonna let him finish his statement and then I'll butt in, but keep these numbers in mind.
Particularly Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, that's who we see most of these with. They're very proactive in their enforcement. I've had cases where they...
Again, that's takeover behavior. That's not street racing when you just start doing donuts in a circle in a parking lot. That's takeover behavior. There's a huge difference. I would tend to say takeovers are more dangerous, but that's kind of subjective.
Sit on a roof of a building, but they'll have a video camera and they'll be videoing the entire proceedings.
In the Triangle,
more takeover activity, but I do want to say, and again, that guy's a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. He lives in Charlotte, assumably because he represents people in Charlotte, but I don't spend a lot of time in Charlotte. But from the people I talk to, both event spectators and organizers, Charlotte seems to have much worse takeover culture than Wake County does, than Raleigh does. I don't know about honestly who has more street racing than the others, because again, most people aren't racing anymore. It still happens, but most of what we see, most of what they're showing you in this video is takeover behavior. And again, it's not to say that street racing doesn't exist or that street racing is better, but in those numbers too, I just want to say it was kind of surprising to me when I saw this story that the numbers are that much lower in Mecklenburg, because I want to say you have more targets. I want to say they're seeing more and more behavior like that. Their Cars and Coffee has shut down multiple times. They're losing venues. It's getting harder for people in Charlotte to throw meets together. So I don't know why their numbers of cases are so low. Maybe they're busy on other things. Maybe they don't prioritize it. But it's really kind of shocking to me. Anyway, I'm going to go back to the video.
There's a big car culture. Matt Pavlov is part of it.
It's kind of a case of the bad apples.
He says the majority of car enthusiasts like himself do not condone racing or even the stunts like this one that shut down I-40 in Durham.
I don't know that there's a way to stop it. It's really similar to kind of all crime.
The best way he can think of is to encourage people to go to recreational racetracks, not public streets.
Get your need for speed out of your system. Go have fun. Put your car and your abilities to the test in a really safe manner and have considerably more fun than you'd ever have on the street. And do so at the risk or without the risk of potentially hurting anyone.
If you're convicted of planned street racing, you could lose your driver's license for up to 3 years, and you could lose your car permanently as it's auctioned off with the proceeds going to local schools. Sarah Kruger, WRAL News.
All the good those schools are doing us lately. Anyway, that last guy, I did just want to add, I agree with most of what he said, except for there are ways we can handle it. A lot of these meets are becoming private invite only. That's a new common trend. It's a trend that should continue. Clubs are collaborating with other clubs so that there's some sort of a hierarchy, some sort of channeled communication where we can cut somebody out if they become a problem, if they don't want to behave, if they want to become a liability. So if he doesn't see a solution to it, I just hope he doesn't host meets. And I don't think he does. I've never heard of him before, but it's a pretty bad attitude to have in the car scene that there's nothing we can do about it. Another thing you could do is if you host meets, you could just hire the cops to come run security for you. They'll happily show up if you pay them, and I'm not saying like pay them under the table. You can pay an off-duty officer to run security for your events. They will gladly hand out tickets and write citations. So on to another story here. The next story I wanted to bring up, and I guess at this point I should probably have already given this warning. A lot of what I'm going to talk about tonight is going to involve death investigations relating to car accidents. So I just want that to be a warning for anybody that may be affected by that, maybe doesn't want to hear some of this. None of the video that I've seen is particularly gruesome. There's not going to be any bodies or people shown or anything like that. Given some of my past experience, I can tend to be a little cold to some of this stuff, so I just try to remind myself that there's a lot of people that aren't going to be able to handle that. So again, if traffic wrecks or talking about the aftermath of traffic wrecks is going to be a trigger for you, I would probably suggest cutting this here. But getting into the next story, there was a family in Cary, and I'm going to let the video do most of the talking here. So this one was racing teen responsible for Cary man's death, family says.
A Cary man was living the American dream. He brought his family here from Iran for a better life, an education for his daughter, and worked 2 jobs to provide for them.
But on July 1st, Armin Rushdie was hit and killed by a 16-year-old driver.
Okay, so the first thing I want to point out here, and you're probably not going to be able to see it that great. They have this location here, Tryon Road, or sorry, not Tryon Road, but High House Road. They just marked this street racing scene. And then up here you have the crash site. But pay attention. They're going to show you pictures of the street racing scene later.
From Baltimore. His family believes the teenager may have been drag racing from a parking lot in Cary to the crash site in Morrisville. Today, the family spoke with WRL's Amanda Lamb for a story you will only see on WRAL.
Armin Roshdi was on his way home from work at Target. He was driving in this direction on Marsville Parkway, and police say the teenage driver blew through this stop sign, was going more than 60 miles an hour, and crashed into Roshdi on the other side of the street.
I lost my husband, so I just try to take it day by day.
Roshdi's wife of almost 20 years, Shaya Gesami, believes his death could have been prevented.
It was senseless, careless, and reckless.
The family learned from the Nextdoor app that teenagers gathered in the parking lot of the H Mart on High House Road.
Okay, so a couple of things. One, this is a terrible tragedy. My heart goes out to this family. This should never have happened. Some of you from the Raleigh area will remember these Cary H Mart meets. I have pretty fond memories of them. I thought they were pretty good meets, but surprise, surprise, Karens on Nextdoor declared this street racers. Let's continue.
Cary, just a few miles from the crash on Wednesday nights, to drag race.
A lot more than 100, probably 200 or 300.
Roshdi's brother went to check it out for himself and took these photos.
Okay, so yeah, and even WRAL says teenagers met up here with the intention to street race. Now, I can obviously not speak for everybody. I'm sure some idiots did, but I remember these as pretty quiet and peaceful meets. Yeah, they're busy. You could see there's a lot of people there. They filled the parking lots. In this parking lot, there's an H Mart, which is, if you're not familiar, Asian grocery store, and there's a Goodberry's. Goodberry's car meets are pretty legendary in North Carolina. I never really got to, I wasn't in the car scene when those were big. But this was a good spot where it was kind of the last of the Goodberry's meets, actually. So teenagers would show up, meet their friends, get food at H Mart, get ice cream at Goodberry's, and pretty much just hang out. There weren't a lot of idiots that I remember. The last time I was at one of these, I was having a conversation with a Cary cop. We talked about a mutual friend of ours, and I thanked them because they were just chilling, hanging out, making their presence known, and making sure nobody was doing anything stupid. This isn't Fast and the Furious. This isn't meeting up for the races.
We get tickets all the time. Then how come these kids, they can drive and race without getting, ticket or getting pulled over or anything like that?
While Morrisville police have not confirmed drag racing was the cause of the crash, this is what the families...
Okay. A couple things I wanted to point out here. One, they already said that this man was an immigrant from Iran, working 2 jobs to support his family and send his daughter to school. I think this car was a Camry, and this is a Mark V Supra. So I'm going to go ahead and go out on a limb and assume that the 16-year-old kid, the car enthusiast, was driving the Mark V Supra. Which leads me to the question, who buys their 16-year-old kid or helps their 16-year-old kid buy a Mark V Supra? That's pretty negligent, in my opinion. That's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Anyway, the other was, they said the Morrisville police would not confirm that this was street racing. Having been a first responder, I can tell you that when you're standing on the side of the road with the cops after a wreck like this, if you talk to the cop and you ask him questions, what he will say to you is very different than what he will say to the press in his report. He can tell you, as one first responder to another, that he can only judge based on tire marks and how fast they can estimate the vehicle was going, that they were traveling at an excessive rate of speed. Unless there's witness accounts, unless there's evidence, they can't say racing unless they have reason to believe racing. So they're going to be very careful about what they say to the media. The media is always not careful about what they say because the cop knows what he says can affect the court case. And so does what the media. That whatever they say also has a very big effect on the court case. But the media is not careful when they speculate. when they jump to conclusions. Now, I do agree this kid was very likely street racing, but the cop knows the weight of those words. And if he says it and he can't back it up, this case could be lost by the prosecutor. That's key.
Strongly believes is to blame, which makes their pain even harder to bear.
I always imagine my future with my husband. My husband always wanted to see my daughter is graduating. She misses that opportunity.
One of the saddest parts of this story is that Rashti's family was driving around looking for him. They came upon the accident scene. They asked a police officer if he was in the car that was hit, and they were told to go to Duke Hospital. Amanda Lamb, WRAL News, Morrisville.
Can't imagine how painful that must have been. We reached out to the teen driver who has not been charged yet. A woman answered the phone but refused to comment. Cary police tell us they're aware of the drag racing issue from neighbors who called them, and they tell us they're stepping up patrols and enforcement.
Cary.
Sorry, I didn't mean to replay that. I did want to say that I couldn't find follow-up to this story, so I'm not sure that there hasn't been any. I just didn't find it. Being that the teenager driving the car that killed the Cary man was a teenager, was 16. His name was not released, so that makes following up the case a little bit difficult. Yeah, and again, I'm not saying any of this to defend the teen or defend people. The car scene as a whole, yes, but the people who get themselves into these incidents, I'm not trying to defend them. I'm playing devil's advocate here, and I'm trying to point out the way the news is going to treat you. If you do anything with your car and you're modified, if you have a wrap, if you have aftermarket wheels, if your exhaust is a little bit loud, if you screw up, the burden is much, much heavier on you and on us than it is on regular traffic cars. This is how they are going to treat you. Again, I would almost say it kind of sounds slanderous to declare that entire meet the races, because most of the people I talked to and I met there wouldn't be there if that was the vibe, wouldn't be there if that's what they thought it was. Now, does that happen? I'm sure some idiots leave. And normally when we have meets like this, we usually want the cops to be there to go pick the people off as they leave. And the wilder these events get, the less and less people feel comfortable going to them. This is normally how the car scene is. But again, people see underglow lights and aftermarket wheels and lowered cars. And I'll tell you, most of what people are doing to their cars now is for show. It's not functional mods, it's not performance mods, it's not horsepower. But it doesn't matter. When Karen on Nextdoor sees that, the street racers have come to town. So moving on to the next story, because you're going to start to see a pattern here. Well, actually, this next story is the one that's really going to have... This is deep, and this is deeper than I can get to on a number of levels. So I'm just going to try to stick to...
Caused the truck to lose control, and the modifications done to the... Investigators are looking into what caused the truck to lose control.
So backing up here, this is the story of 20-year-old Landon Glass, who was driving a 2011 GMC truck when it struck and killed an 11-year-old Haley Brooks during the 2022 Raleigh Christmas parade. He was towing a float. He claimed he lost control of his brakes. He was yelling out the window. He was screaming. They were honking the horn. They were trying to let people know, I've lost control of the truck. I can't stop. I can't stop. And he ran over and killed 11-year-old Haley Brooks. So that's what this story is.
And the modifications done to the vehicle, as you can see.
Let me back that up again.
Investigators are looking into what caused the truck to lose control and the modifications done to the vehicle. As you can see in this video here, it appears to have been modified with a lift kit and also aftermarket wheels and rims. Troubleshooter Diane Wilson has been looking at new court records.
I just have to say, two things that should not affect the functionality of a vehicle is a lift kit and the wheels. Now, there's more to this story, and we'll get to that in a bit, but wheels don't make a car unstable. A lift kit shouldn't, if done properly, make a car unstable.
That give us some insight about the accident. What are you learning, Diane?
Steve, you know, right after that accident, a lot of questions surrounding the truck, specifically any open recalls. And we do know there is one open recall, but not related to the braking system, instead the airbags. 20-year-old Landon Christopher Glass, the driver charged in the Raleigh Christmas parade incident that killed an 11-year-old girl, is facing a number of charges, including misdemeanor death by motor vehicle, careless and reckless driving, improper equipment, and unsafe movement. Besides those charges, Virginia court records show
I do want to pause this here because they do show his charges from Virginia on the screen. Improper pollution control, so that's an emissions violation. Failure to have vehicle inspected, that's procedural, but there's actually a deeper reason to that. Window tint decal on the window, failure to have vehicle inspected. You can see there was an exhaust one here too. All relatively minor in and of themselves, with exception for the reason of why he can't get his vehicle inspected, and they're going to talk about that more.
he had multiple tickets, including 4 tickets for failure to have a vehicle inspected, along with other tickets for improper exhaust systems and no marker lights. Raleigh Police Forensics team spending hours taking a close look at Glass's 2011 GMC Denali HD. Experts from the Center for Auto Safety telling the I-Team the report from crash investigators is going to be critical here in determining whether or not this is a safety defect issue, a bad modification by the owner, or something else entirely.
Okay, and so one of the keys, and I'm going to get into the facts of the case, or at least the alleged facts named in the lawsuit, the civil suit that's going to be coming later after his criminal suit. But one of the facts in the case is that the emergency brake in the vehicle was disabled, and that's going to be key. So again, a lot of these cases that I've picked aren't because I think these people are innocent. In fact, all of the cases I picked, I think they are guilty, based on the evidence that's been presented at the time in the media. And I don't even think this is the... I think there's been some bad reporting in how they've handled it, but the conclusions in and of themselves are not necessarily wrong. I'm just trying to really draw people's attention to how this is getting treated when there's the car scene or potential street racing or vehicle modifications involved, because we're going to look at another case or two later where some of those don't come into play as much, and it just kind of seems different. Now, another thing too, this happened during the Raleigh Christmas parade in front of a bunch of people. That makes this story a much bigger story, and way more people are going to follow it and pay attention to this. My heart goes out to everybody in this case, the family that lost their daughter, and this kid as well, but I'll get into it. He is at fault here, from what I can tell, from what I know about this case, but I think they're going to throw the book at him a little bit harder than they should. I'll explain why I feel that way more in a bit, but let me switch over to... I'm going to summarize some of this. I will say he did have misdemeanor death by motor vehicle, and it has been upped to felony involuntary manslaughter. But the facts of the civil suit, and again, I'm not going to read all of this, but I did link all of these stories that I've covered, and this document, which is the civil suit from the family, or from the estate of the 11-year-old girl, represented by the family, against Landon Glass, the dance company, the Greater Raleigh Merchants Association. But the facts of the case that I wanted to get into here, and this is pretty key. So I'm mainly going to focus here starting on page 4, where it begins the driver history. All right. So the major things were Defendant Glass was 20 years old when he struck and killed Haley. Prior to the parade, Defendant Glass had no prior experience driving a vehicle in parades or pulling a parade float. Prior to the parade, Defendant Glass had been cited for more than 20 traffic violations since 2021, including 5 charges for failure to have his vehicle inspected. That's going to be key. That's not going to play in his favor. Defendant Glass came to Raleigh the night before the parade and stayed in a hotel. Defendant Glass arrived at his hotel in Raleigh sometime after 1 a.m. and woke up no later than 5:30 a.m. on the morning of the parade. Defendant Glass had less than 5 hours of sleep prior to driving in the parade. That's also not going to play in his favor. Defendant Glass was joined in the vehicle by two males, one of whom was 21 years old and the other was 22 years old. Defendant Glass and the other two occupants of the vehicle were all illegally carrying handguns in the parade. I think the main thing was they were under 21, and you're not supposed to have guns during the parade. But other than this unfortunate circumstance, they weren't waving them, they weren't displaying them. Had this tragedy never happened, nobody would have known they had them. So, again, this is more just painting the picture of this guy's evil, this guy's bad. I didn't really understand this part. A commercial vehicle in North Carolina is defined as a Class C motor vehicle that is used to transport 16 or more passengers, including the driver. In the parade, the truck operated by Defendant Glass was used to transport 16 or more passengers. Now, I don't understand that because that GMC Denali has 5 seats. Now, I think they're talking about the parade float, which would have carried 16 or more people. But again, normally parade floats wouldn't be classified as commercial vehicles. I don't understand that part. If you have any idea what that's about, please comment and let me know. Defendant Glass did not possess a commercial driver's license. I'm pretty sure most of the people towing parade floats did not possess a commercial driver's license. Some might have. Where's the other? Defendant Glass was the owner of the 2011 GMC truck. All right, and then there's some here's where it gets really damning for Landon. Upon information and belief, prior to the parade, Defendant Glass personally performed extensive work and modifications to the truck. Defendant Glass errantly put power steering fluid in the brake fluid reservoir. Now, that's key, and I think this is ultimately why his brakes failed. I had to ask my mechanic why this is bad, because they're both hydraulic fluids, and I know as a parts guy, you just use what you're supposed to use in certain things. If it calls for this, you use this. If it calls for that, you use that. And if you don't know, don't mess with it. But the main reason, since both are hydraulic fluids, that this is bad is because power steering fluid, that system does not come out under nearly as much heat as the braking system does. The braking system comes under so much heat that it can actually, even with proper braking fluid, if you're racing or towing, and I mean track racing, ask anyone who does SCCA or track racing, you can boil your brake fluid. You get what's called brake fade. Once the brake fluid gets so hot it starts to boil, the brakes don't work effectively anymore. If that's what had happened, and again, power steering fluid has a lower boiling point than brake fluid, so brake fade would happen during normal conditions if you're using an incorrect fluid like this. That can cause the brakes to fail. Now, continuing on, Defendant Glass did not hire an ASC certified mechanic to flush the power steering fluid from the truck's braking system. Again, if you go to a Jiffy Lube or a Firestone or a AAA or wherever you like to go, more than likely, unless you're having a big job done, the tech working on your car either has some of his ASEs or none of his ASEs, but they work under the direction of a master tech who has their ASEs. So you going to a certified shop doesn't mean you're getting an ASC certified mechanic on your oil change or your brake pads. So that's, I don't know why they go to that point, because again, you can go to a qualified shop and get a qualified mechanic who is not ASC certified all day long, but it doesn't help. Instead, Defendant Glass attempted to flush the power steering fluid from the braking system. Defendant Glass did not hire an ASE mechanic to ascertain whether any damage was caused by putting power steering fluid in the truck's brake reservoir. I don't think power steering fluid in and of itself would damage the system. I don't know. I would worry about the additives possibly corroding the system. Again, if you know why that would damage the system, why it couldn't just be flushed out, comment that down below. But it's more the fact of it being in there. That's really the problem here. Defendant Glass failed to properly flush the power steering fluid from the braking system. I think that's apparent based on the last couple things we read. Upon information and belief on the date of parade, power steering fluid and other contaminants remained in the braking system. It gets a little redundant here, but here's one. Moreover, the truck had numerous modifications, many of which required significant expenditure of funds, with the sole purpose of said modifications being the aesthetic appeal. Such modifications were either performed personally by Defendant Glass, performed at the request of Defendant Glass, or contributed to Defendant Glass's decision to purchase the truck. The truck was lifted using an aftermarket lift kit and was equipped with aftermarket wheels that offset the tires outside of the truck's wheel well by approximately 7 inches. Interesting note, because actually having more tire touching the ground would actually improve your braking distance, but I think they look ugly. Upon information and belief, the emergency brake line was terminated because the originally manufactured emergency brake line was not long enough to fit the truck as modified by the installation of the lift kit. This was a new fact I actually missed earlier when I was going over this. That was dumb. This is why he's going to lose. This gets into kind of how the scene's going now. People are more focused on what we're doing to our cars because we want it to look a certain way, and they're not thinking as much about the functionality of their vehicle. Is there a purpose to this mod? Is there a benefit to this mod? And the culture is getting a little stupid with that. And this is unfortunately taken a tragic turn where, I don't want to say narcissism, but this kind of clout chasing about having a certain type of vehicle takes priority over having a functional vehicle. But again, there's a lot here, and a lot of what they found, I would almost bet Landon Glass would have had to admit to for them to know some of this stuff. So I think after all this went down, and again, I don't know, they could have found this in their own investigation, but a lot of the details they state sound like he admitted to a lot of this stuff. I imagine this kid's scared for his life because his life's basically going to be over. And that's what I think is unfortunate, because he's going to lose the civil suit and he's going to owe this family some money. And with the media coverage this case is getting, he's going to have a hard time flipping burgers. And that's why I feel for this kid, because he probably should be nowhere around a vehicle. He probably should be nowhere around a shop. If you were to go to a Jiffy Lube and see this kid working there, I think you need to turn around and leave. But I also think he needs to get a good job because he's going to owe this family some money. And I think he deserves the right to be able to pay off his debt to this family. But I think that's going to be very difficult for him because this is a pretty damning case, unfortunately for him. And it was unfortunate too when I was looking at this, because I was trying to show some of how the media portrayed this case, and they just kept saying over and over and over again, the vehicle was modified, the vehicle was modified. And the news didn't really do their investigative duty of explaining to us what those modifications were. They just kind of threw modifying your vehicle under the bus. Now, a lot of people modify their car every single day. Change their wheels, change their tires, get some performance parts, make the car just a little bit faster. All of these things are fine if you've done your research, if you've done your homework, if you're not creating a safety hazard for yourself and other people. And most people who do that to their car aren't doing that. A lot of people are, unfortunately, though. And this is a very extreme case. But again, it's really upsetting. And if anyone wants to go through the rest of this again, this is the document cloud link. This will be in the description as well. I'm going to shift on to, I've got 2 more street racing cases that I'm going to go through very, very briefly. And then I'm going to shift right into the last case, which I think is going to paint a pretty good picture for why I think they're throwing the book at this kid a little bit harsher than they need to. Again, I think he's guilty based on the information that's come out so far. He's clearly guilty. He was witnessed by the entire city of Raleigh parade, unfortunately. My heart definitely goes out to the people that were just trying to take their kids to the parade that day. That that is probably the most tragic thing. Nobody could have expected what had happened, and a lot of kids probably saw some things they didn't need to see that day. But transitioning on to another story, and again, this is not as high profile of a case. I did not see a lot of follow-up on this. So again, I have another video here, and I'm going to play this.
And breaking at noon, troopers say street racing was a factor in a crash that killed a 66-year-old Durham woman. Troopers say 2 cars were racing on US 15 in Granville County Friday night. One of them crossed the center line and hit an oncoming car head-on. Brenda Gregory was killed. Terrell Curry is charged in her death. Friends of Gregory tell WREL she was a caring woman who worked at Sandy Ridge Elementary in Durham.
And again, I didn't find any follow-up to this case or how that guy's trial went. But admittedly, I didn't look real hard. Then another case that was here in Raleigh. Oop, I actually skipped ahead. I was going to do this video. This was another street race. So I think most all of these, the Christmas parade was 2022, but I think all of the rest of these has pretty much been 2023. If I go back to the Carrie Mann's death, the H Mart story, that one was 2021. This one was April 2023, and I don't really have a video here, unfortunately, so I'm going to read bits and pieces of this one. This was 2 a.m. in the morning on Lake Wheeler Road, close to Centennial Parkway, near the North Carolina State Farmers Market. Jada Ballin, who drove a 2015 Chevy Malibu with a female passenger in the crash, was arrested and charged with felony serious injury by vehicle, the Raleigh Police Department said in a news release. Ballin alleged to have raced a 2007 Honda Accord driven by Jacelyn Morrison, 24, heading eastbound on Centennial Parkway. Morrison lost control of her vehicle, sideswiped Ballin. So Morrison was hospitalized, and there was also the crash. They also reference another crash which happened not far from me in Raleigh on Atlantic Avenue, where a 33-year-old man was killed. So yeah, I did see a follow-up on that guy's case. He got charged. Pretty sure he lost. Or he hasn't gone trial yet. I don't remember exactly, but that seems pretty open shut. A lot of these are pretty open shut, but again, this one was funny because, not funny because of anything that happened to the people, but it was funny because it's a 2015 Chevy Malibu and a 2007 Honda Accord. So what are you racing for? No one cares. Like, it's 2 shitbox cars, in my opinion, driving like idiots, and you're going to get yourselves hurt or somebody else hurt in the process. What's the point? But again, like, the focus and the attention I've noticed has gone to street car racing, street scene, and modified vehicles. So when 2 people in 2 shitbox regular traffic cars go street racing, they just come out with a news article that says 2 people were street racing, they got arrested, one was hospitalized, blah, 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 whatever. Anything involving the car scene or modified vehicles gets looked at under a very, very different light. And this last case just happened recently. In fact, I think this dude just saw the judge for the first time a week ago. And if you're a social justice warrior, I wouldn't watch the rest of this story because this one's going to piss you off. So hold on 1 second here, unmute this, go back to the beginning. And yeah, this story headline is driver shows lack of remorse at crash scene for 6-year-old killed. Now again, excuse me. This is another example of why I think Landon Glass is going to get the book thrown at him unfairly. And then there's assholes like this guy.
New today, family and friends have set up a memorial to honor the 6-year-old girl killed after a car hit her in Cary. We're also learning new information from warrants about what the driver police say is responsible told officers after it happened. Hello and thanks for joining us. I'm
Before they go into this story, I do want to make one critique on the news. Pay attention to the account of where the girl was.
Ashley Rowe.
And I'm Gerald Owens. Jocelyn Perez Hernandez was killed Friday on Walnut Street. Police say Andrew Everett hit her while speeding. Today, Everett was in court for the first time. WRO's Chelsea Donovan joins us live from downtown Raleigh to tell us what new warrants reveal about this incident. Chelsea?
Yeah, absolutely, Gerald. 50-year-old Andrew Everett faced a judge this morning on 5 different counts after police say he was driving fast and recklessly and in turn ended up killing a 6-year-old little girl who was simply playing on her front lawn. Now, as you mentioned...
That's one account, playing on her front lawn. And again, this is a horrible tragedy. I'm not trying to accuse anybody of lying. My heart goes out to this family. But again, we're listening to this from the news media, and I have questions about where this girl was standing.
In a search warrant I obtained earlier this afternoon, police say that he tried to hurry the investigation, even blamed the 6-year-old girl, and showed little remorse. It's hard to imagine a memorial in the front yard of this Carey family's home. Trinkets and flowers and stuffed animals that now sit on the lawn where 6-year-old Jocelyn Perez Hernandez was playing on Friday morning. She was standing here and he hit her. This is Jocelyn's father who spoke.
Okay, that's another account. She's just inside of the sidewalk. She was standing in her yard. That was her father saying she was standing right here.
To us in Spanish. He says Jocelyn, who he calls his baby, was just playing on the sidewalk in front of the home when she was suddenly
Now she was on the sidewalk.
Struck by a car speeding by. Today, the family stood in mourning, setting out flowers and gathering in prayer. A new year without their little loved one. It was here on Walnut Street in Cary where police responded Friday morning, and they centered their...
Okay, and that's another thing I wanted to point out. We're going to table the where was she standing point for a moment and take a look at this piece of shit car. Because I have a hard time believing that him hitting that little girl did that much damage to his vehicle. I have a much easier time believing that his vehicle was already a poorly maintained piece of shit, and he was already an irresponsible driver. That bumper doesn't match, it's been replaced. I really don't think hitting this poor little girl is what caused his headlight to be missing, and that whole damage on the fender, most of that had to have been there before, because that's a lot. That is a lot of damage for, and again, speaking as a former first responder, having seen a lot of traffic accidents, this is a lot of damage for hitting a small child. I really just think this guy was a bad driver driving a piece of shit car.
Attention around this blue Honda Fit they say was driven by 50-year-old Andrew Everett of Cary. A search warrant obtained by WRAL stated he had marijuana paraphernalia in the car and was going 15 miles over the speed limit. The document written by Cary police also contained details that are disturbing, including a direct quote from
Last warning, turn it off if you're an SJW.
From Everett. Police said he told them, "I'm not sure why this investigation is taking more than 5 minutes. It wasn't my fault. No one was watching her and she jumped out in front of me. That retard." Everett faces...
I warned you this is going to piss you off. Okay. Now, back to the where was she standing debate. Of course, and nobody trusts or believes him, he says that she jumped out in front of him, which would have put her in the road. The dad said sidewalk, but they all pointed towards the grass where they were laying the flowers. Now, it's just a discrepancy. I just have questions. I know it's hard for the media to try to clear something like that up with the grieving family. But, and again, I don't believe, I tend to believe he came onto the sidewalk or he came onto the, and that's really why I'm asking this. I wanted to know how far he came off the road to hit this child, or if the child did step onto the street. Either way, it's all irrelevant. Nobody feels sorry for this guy. Nobody, I think, really believes that this girl was, I mean, obviously she might have been unsupervised, but I don't really think anybody faults this girl here. This guy's irresponsible and an asshole, and he's going to have to deal with what he's done.
His 5 charges, including involuntary manslaughter and misdemeanor death by motor vehicle.
And Everett remains in the Wake County Jail tonight under a $26,000 bond. He's due back in court later this month.
Another thing I wanted to point out, and I know bonds are tricky. Landon got a $250,000 secured bond. This asshole got a $26,000 bond. Now, of course, a lot of factors play into that. What your family can afford, your flight risk, you know, that kid's number of tickets, I think, is something the judge said explicitly was what led him to go, I believe the news article I read said 5 times over the suggested bond for those crimes that he was being charged with. But, yeah, like, this guy's a dick. Nobody is going to shed a tear for this guy. If I was his mother, I would be embarrassed by him with that kind of behavior. It's, and again, he's a pothead. His car's a piece of shit. You know, no offense to potheads, but stay off the road. His car's a piece of shit. He's speeding. And he's, you know, unremorseful and shows no sympathy for this family whose child he's just stolen from them. And, you know, this is a fairly recent case, so we'll see the follow-up to that. This guy's probably, you know, I could see him in a Hannibal Lecter mask, so he doesn't spit on people when he goes into court. Like, he could probably be, based on what I'm reading off of him, he could probably be a pariah in the courtroom, and have one of those interesting videos. But again, this is someone you don't feel sorry for. A 20-year-old kid that now has to repay his debt to the family that he's just offended against. That is something that, again, this kid, just Google this kid's name and he won't get a job at McDonald's. And that's why I feel bad for him. But this guy has clearly made a lot of poor choices in life. But again, you know, at least he's not a street racer, right? That's mostly what I wanted to get into tonight. And I just kind of wanted to encourage people to pay attention to some of these cases. And I know there's a lot of bad news out there lately, but just try to pay attention anytime a street racer gets in trouble or a modified car gets ticketed. And I think you're going to start to see more and more of this bias towards car enthusiasts in the car scene. And I kind of want to just ask some of you to just pay attention for this for me. If you see something, I know you can't post links on YouTube, but if you see something in your local area and you want me to take a look at it that's kind of similar, where they're just throwing the car scene or people deemed as street racers, as opposed to, you know, some of the articles I read today where they're actually street racing, under the bus for being part of this culture, just comment the news headline and the town for me to look for, and I'll take a look at the article and I'll give you my opinion on it. But yeah, I'd be interested to hear what other cases in other areas people find that are kind of similar to this. If you think someone's getting railroaded for something, like this kid's gonna get, you know, and again, this kid, like, you can look, if I go get a picture of Landon, let's see. Let me get a picture of him, because if you just see pictures of this kid, yeah, like, I think in these photos he's kind of in shock. Like, this is his mug shot. Kind of interested to see, again, you know, here's the truck again, the picture we saw earlier. Not quite a Carolina squat, just maybe a little bit taller in the front and in the back, so not totally stupid. I don't like those wheels though. But I want to see if it had pictures of him from his court the other day, but probably not. Maybe I'll have to do, there we go. I mean, here's one. Where is the family? Like, you can kind of, like, he looks pretty stern in that one, but I mean, every picture I see of this kid, like, he looks scared to death. Like, he knows this is serious. I think he takes it seriously. I think he knows there's no getting off of this. There's no way he's gonna get not guilty. It's not happening. It would really shock me. But, you know, again, I'm saying this based on the evidence that I've seen thus far, and there's always more that can come out in the trial, so that's just my opinion. But it's a stark difference between this kid and where was the asshole? I think I already lost that one. But the other asshole smoking pot in his Honda Fit and speeding 50 miles over the speed limit. I think he gets the weight of this. I think he understands how serious this is. And, you know, I just feel for him having to live with that, because he didn't set out trying to be an idiot that day. He just made a lot of poor choices before. And honestly, I think other than obviously cutting the e-brake line so that he could fit those wheels, I guess, deciding to tow that float was his biggest mistake. It could have failed in so many other places. I did see one comment that was interesting. It was in the, I'm not going to go back and look for it now, but it was in this document. And it was, see if I can find it. I'm not going to go back and look for it. It's too far, but it was something along the lines of he made no attempt to swerve to miss the child. And I'd kind of like to see video of it, because if you're in a parade and there's kids dancing in front of you and there's pedestrians all up and down the street, I'm assuming on both sides, where do you swerve? That's my biggest question. Like, because the comment sounded like, well, he didn't swerve into someone else's child, he just stayed steadfast towards mine. Which, again, it's going to suck for whoever he hits. That's not a good situation to be in. That's the worst place I can imagine to have a brake failure. But again, where did you want him to swerve? And again, video evidence might come out that he had a path he could have swerved into away from everybody. I don't know. I just don't know where you can swerve in a street parade based on that context. But anyway, that was the theme of tonight's stream. I hope you guys liked it. Please hit the like button. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. I'm going to go after, you know, more news media in the future, I'm sure. Other big companies. If there's anything you'd like me to take a look into that's automotive related, comment that. I'll be happy to dig up some dirt on big companies, if I can find anything on it, that is. I'm not the strongest researcher. But again, this stream's coming in just under an hour, so thank you to anybody that stuck with me.